Hello, everyone. Welcome to CFS Summit 2022, Render the Phygital Reality. My name is Enrique Menendez, Editor-in-Chief at CFS, and your host for this year's summit. Today is Day 3 Science, the Method for Retail Evolution. And we're so pleased to have all of you with us in VR at the Grand Palais Ephemer in the Spin Metaverse. Our topic for this panel is Mind the Planet with Circular Retail Innovation. Our moderator is Yasmin Jones-Henry, journalist of the Financial Times and strategist at Ing Media and Rayburn Design. Our speakers are Andrew Harzager, head of Retail Innovation Lab at Cartier, and Gail Lamort, Sustainability Innovation Lead at Kering, Camille Benish, head of Marketing and Partnerships at Google ATAP, Petra Schweiger, Director, Project Manager at Accelerating Circularity, and Claudia Zerikowski, Circular Design and Circularity ID Lead. At CFS, we define science as a way of thinking that safeguards fashion survival and evolution in line with society. It's a method to create fashion and culture in harmony with the planet and humanity. For today's conversation, we are interested in innovation as a practice. The reality is that there's theory and ideas, and then there's action. We need both of these. And we also have individuals, and then there are corporations, and we need to find alignment, common interest, motivation, and inspiration that works on both the personal and organizational level. One thing is to say, I want to save the planet, and another thing is to implement completely new processes and models at centuries-old institutions. So today, we're going to hear about some retail innovations and research that help build a more sustainable and circular fashion industry, from augmented reality to fabric, textile, and supply chain innovation. But we're also going to try to put a finger on how we tap into the energy and the mindset that nourishes innovation and helps us find balance between the fashion systems at play, the planet, and humanity. I now pass it over to Yasmin, who will guide our conversation.
Thank you, Enrique. So I'll kick off with a question that's for the entire group that will essentially be the main thread of this narrative. So we've all got a minute, you've all got a minute to answer, so I'll kick off. So for the purpose of this conversation, please could you share what your view is as one of the most systemic and important challenges to overcome within the fashion industry that is stunting innovation and resulting in a negative impact on the planet? So if I start with Anne-Gaëlle.
Sure. So what I see today as the most important systemic challenge for the fashion system is really to implement the circular business models, which bring new options for our raw materials, supply chain, and for our customers, and also to promote the new consumption practices that is getting born now, which will allow to reduce the pressure which we put on the natural resources. This is very key in Kering research for improving its impact.
Thank you. And Andrew?
From my end, I would say that a big systemic challenge would be the nature of complex matrixed organizations, of corporations that have a tendency to lose information and filter messages at layers going up to the top. It becomes very challenging for company leadership to really have a full mental picture of the activities of the organization, whether that relates to innovation or sustainability, material usage, supply chain. There's a kind of reduction of detail as you go up to the top. And I think this is a challenge that's very hard to overcome.
Thank you. And Camille?
Yes, sure. So I think from my point of view, it's all related to implementing change and making sure that companies can actually innovate and create new businesses for both when it comes to circularity, design, and also make sure that this gets accounted in the P&L and make sure that we can change the usual metrics for tracking fashion business, implementing sustainability. I would say, and when it comes back to innovation, there is always a huge gap between an idea and what could be possible, and then the implementation of this idea, and making sure that an idea can get into a business and get implemented at scale within our industries. So from my perspective, this is the most important change that would need to happen if we want to make an impactful change within the next few years.
First of all, thanks so much for having me. I just would like to introduce myself briefly. My name is Petra Schweiger, and I'm currently on the Accelerating Circularity project in Europe. Accelerating Circularity is a nonprofit organization catalyzing new supply chains and business models to turn textile waste into mainstream raw materials. My background is in textile and apparel supply chain. I was mostly in Asia for the past almost 20 years, working in product development, sourcing, buying for casual fashion brands. And now I'm based out of Austria. So yeah, thanks so much for the question. It is really not a simple one. And my answer, I guess, is not a highly sophisticated one. Through my work at Accelerating Circularity, so I'm a coordinator and a facilitator of a circular system for textile to textile recycling. So I work with an extended value chain of collectors, sorters, pre-processors, recyclers, of course, yarn and fabric manufacturers, certifying bodies, digital platforms of all kinds, and of course, brands as well. And there is absolutely no question of how complex our industry is. Each of our entities with our own processes and procedures, our consumers and their behaviors, our global supply chains. But this is a system, right? Everything is interconnected. Every single decision we take impacts someone somewhere. In addition, though, our industry is fast-paced. We are always projecting into the future. It's season after season. We are trend-led, and we constantly look for newness. And this, I think, is the issue also sometimes. We get easily distracted by whatever is the latest. Through my work, especially here at Accelerating Circularity, I think it is helpful to sometimes take a step back, be aware of the complexity, but zone in and understand what do we have already? What can we work with today, considering that there is so much innovation out there already? We then, of course, have to connect the dots, think through all the connections and nodes on outcome and impact. Systems are not built or transformed in a day. We work with chemical recyclers for polyester and also cellulose. Their commercial facilities are not operational in a week. So that, in essence, means that once we have set a path in the strategy, we definitely need endurance to stick to it, potentially adjust along the way, but to stay with it, even if this does not make the best and newest headline always.
So I'm Claudia Sharkovsky. I work for Circular Fashion. I'm working mostly on our Circularity ID, which is our digital product passport, but I also do work upstream on the circular design side, which I will talk a little bit about later. To answer this question, I would say one of the most important systemic challenges is really the mindset. So, you know, as humanity, as a species, we really have this like mindset. It's very fixed, right? We're still kind of focused on survival rather than this idea of a growth mindset, which is a little bit more flexible and really allows space for innovation. I think specifically when we're talking about sustainability, we've always as a, you know, in the industry, looked at it as something extra, like a side department, an additional department, somebody dedicated to that. But really, it's a foundation. Like, if we don't have a planet, we don't have an industry. So we also see it as an enormous growth opportunity for companies when it does come to innovation.
Walk us through the circular fashion model and how textiles and technology intersect to achieve your mission.
So at Circular Fashion, we have a mission to really increase the amount of fiber-to-fiber recycling that's happening in the fashion industry. So Currently, the latest statistic was less than 1% of fibers are being recycled into new fibers, and our mission is really to increase that. And we do that by actually working with all the stakeholders of the fashion supply chain. So we start upstream, working with fashion brands originally we started working with the recycling companies to understand what are their feedstock requirements and how can we inform the fashion brands of those feedstock requirements. So we do this in the form of design workshops, circular design criteria, circular design consulting, things like this, so that we already address the upstream. And then we also make sure that those hard, the efforts of the brands are communicated throughout the supply chain. So we really bridge the brands, the consumers, and sorters and recyclers with our Circularity ID product. So this is our digital product passport solution, and we can really, communicate and give a point of, after sales of communication with the customer, where we can give them the circular design features, the sustainable materials, certifications that the product has, as well as take back information. And then finally, circular fashion goes a little bit beyond just transparency by also connecting the digital product passport and the garment to an intelligent sorting station. So sorters can actually quickly access information that they need in order to make decisions to increase the quality of the recycling. So for example, if they're going to re-commerce the item and resell it, they have the name, the original retail price, and if the brand already has a take-back program, they know what to do with it. And if it is for recycling, they already know which recycling cycle it goes into based on the composition. So that's a little bit how we, imagine closing the loop with between textiles and technology.
First of all, what does circularity mean actually? We know it's for one to design out waste and pollution, and also to keep materials and products in use for a longer period of time. There are nowadays, of course, various approaches and opportunities for brands. There is resale, there is rental, there is repair. But we here at Accelerating Circularity, we specifically look at recycling, fiber to fiber, textile to textile. So in our view, there is no either or. Every garment, no matter how many times it was rented out or repaired, at one point it will cascade along the technical cycle. So yes, it is about waste management. It is about end of life and the responsible disposal of materials. We work with a lot of collectors and sorters of post-consumer materials. These can be charities, these can be non-profit organizations. We recommend brands to work with those collectors and sorters too, if they want to set up a take-back program. Because these collectors and sorters, they are the professionals. They handle and sort way more accurately. Their facilities are also the place for volume aggregation, which is important for the recyclers. But it doesn't end there. So once the materials go through the process of recycling, that's when the material becomes beginning of life again. So yes, we look at processes to reduce the virgin resources. We look at the product. Products made in the course of our project are designed for recyclability. Designing for durability is extremely important too, so that these materials, the product, can stay in use the longest possible time. But we at Accelerating Circularity, we have a little bit coined the term of designing from recycled. That is extremely important too. So it is essential to understand the output of all these processes and to bring back these outputs, fiber or chip, back into the supply chain so that materials stay in the loop. And that is circularity too.
For the benefit of the audience, I think we should take it back a step. If you could, and I'll start with Gail, define circularity in context of the previous model that we've had of take, make, waste.
Oh, yes. Actually, the take, make, waste is hopefully an old school system, because in my understanding and based on our let's say industry, it was taking the resources, produce as much as we can, and getting rid of it. It's very basic, but it's this, and yes, it's our role now to bring new ways of doing for our customers.
And so with that in mind, how would you describe Kering's approach across your various brands that you're integrating this circular model across the business?
So actually, we have to rethink completely the way we are sourcing, producing, and use and extend the life of our resources and the products, which is a major concept. So we have to think, where do we source? Do we source about in regenerative fields, farmers or producers? Do we use recycled material? What would be the benefit of the eco-conception on products, which will allow to let's say lift the impact that we are putting on natural resources, and how do we build the garments in order to make sure that we can recycle them at the end of their life in a proper way. But we have to think as well, of course, in the repairability, so we can get the higher value of the garments we are putting on the market, and we can think of the re-commerce of the goods, which is a business model, of course, we are studying on a very sharp view.
Thank you. And Camille, this next question is for you. So how does a tech company like Google approach the task of developing technology that can support retail innovation and sustainable models?
Yes, sure. So Google is really trying to operate all our businesses in an environmental point of view, and we're driving positive environmental impact in the whole value chain. So it could range from making data centers that are more efficient with the energy consumption, using machine learning algorithms in order to amplify the sustainability impact, working on carbon-free energy for anything related to our retail spaces or even buildings, empowering our users also with technology that help addressing sustainable challenge. And this is where we have many programs of research where we can use advanced technologies and sometimes hardware innovations on top of machine learning in order to reach that. And finally, also engaging our supply chain, as it was mentioned by Anne-Gaëlle, on human rights, but also on making sure that we can improve traceability. Those 4 pillars are really key to Google's strategy and are applied within all our supply chain and all our value chain.
Thank you. And Andrew, how do you approach retail innovation in the luxury sector? Or perhaps where does the process for this kind of new initiative start?
Yeah, well, for us in retail, it's so much about experience that this comes down to using a process of design really to address the human needs of our retail business. And I would say technologies emerging and otherwise can be a material for that process, but fundamentally the process is about design. And so the way we source the innovations there really comes down to speaking to the people who are at the front lines of our business, meaning the sales associates in our boutiques and our clients who are there. Oftentimes in retail organizations, there can be a very significant kind of cultural divide between retail and the corporate business. And so we work to bridge that and source our project ideas from the reality of the business that's happening inside our boutiques. We try to marry those needs with the long-term business initiatives. And so for us, that's about creating new experiences. We have a great luxury, you could say, of coming into our clients' lives at moments of emotional significance. And that's something that we take seriously. And it's about, building deeper relationships with them more than it is about creating more transactions on the spot, you could say.
That segues into my next question, actually, in context to that, relationships and new ways of thinking, as Anne-Gaëlle referenced in reference to take, make, waste. This is a question for all three of you, so please feel free to answer at your discretion. But how can we inspire, foster, and nurture new ways of thinking that will drive retail innovation?
So Accelerating Circularity is a nonprofit organization. So for us, collaboration is definitely key. We know nowadays we all talk about it. We all talk about collaboration, pre-competitive collaboration. But in fact, that's exactly what we here at Accelerating Circularity do. We work with 40 plus businesses from across the value chain. Some of them are competitors, and still they're open to sit in the same room at the same table and talk about the same thing. And that is definitely what is very inspirational to me.
I think that we have to work more on coalitions, you know, on a collective approaches, because I think it's over now to work on, you know, with, of course, there is confidentiality in the project, especially in luxury, but I think that now we need to have a collective approach and work with coalition. And this is exactly what Kering is doing, especially with the Fashion Pact or which has been created in 2019 in the G7 in Biarritz, and it is something we are working on the day-to-day basis, with working with others in order to bring things to life. And this is very important, because we have to raise the awareness across all the industry and all the supply chain to make sure that we are working on concrete solutions which can be brought to the retail and to the customers.
Thank you. And Andrew, what's your take on this?
I would agree with you, Angel. The importance of creating coalitions is incredible. We start to see this now with coalitions around blockchain in our industry, establishing standards that we're working across what might otherwise be considered competitive businesses to establish norms around traceability of components or product provenance. There's a number of really concrete business and sustainability issues that can be solved through these kinds of coalition building. And you know, inside companies, I think what we need to do is do the hard work of co-creation across different departments and involving lots of different perspectives of people who have something at stake. It makes projects harder to involve multiple voices, but you know, in the end, when you're doing an innovation project, the hardest thing in the world is not to have the good ideas; it's to actually implement things at scale. And in order to do that, you need the hand of a lot of people at all levels of the organization. And so the earlier you can bring those people in and give them a hand in creating what the solution is, the greater success you'll have at industrializing whatever that good idea might be.
Thank you. And Camille, any thoughts on this? Ways that we can...
Yeah, I think so. Of course, coalitions, and especially from companies from different perspectives, fashion and tech, and we do collaborate with Kering and all the big fashion players. But I think, from my point of view, it's also related to KPIs and how do you measure and track success? When do you track it? Is it a short-term approach? Is it a longer-term approach? Because we all know that innovation is not comfortable. You're definitely getting out of your zone of comfort. It might even impact your profitability, your efficiency. It might impact the processes you used to work on, and it might also on a very short-term approach leads to less revenues for a company and smaller margins. So I also think that companies need to accept that if we really want to change, we need to also change the way we measure our impact and the KPIs we are following on a monthly basis. And this goes back to what Andrew was saying, getting sure that all levels within an organization have the sustainability at core and can implement solutions and make people collaborate together towards one objective, which is an objective that is set and measurable. And Google is a very data-driven company, so we always try to have very, very data-driven POVs and trackers in order to make sure we can track everything. Just back to our data center, we improved the use of energy of, like, I think we diminished from 70% within the latest few years just by using machine learning. And this is exactly, so it was not an easy road, and it was really, very bumpy and not that easy, but this is what we need to do in order to make change happen.
Thank you. And that moves us nicely into our next topic in terms of how tech can be used as a catalyst for retail innovation, sustainability. So picking up on that thread, Camille, Google, I'm aware, is in the research phase of Google Loop. Could you possibly walk us through a bit about the work that you're doing and how it opens up more opportunities for circularity across different industries?
Absolutely. So ATAP is an innovation lab located in Mountain View. We're very focused on hardware and inventing the next wave of computing for ambient computing. We don't believe that the next wave of innovation is very flashy. We think it's ambient and human-driven. And we've developed a miniature radar called SOLI, S-O-L-I, that emits a broad wave. And when it hits the object or the people or whatever it's touching, the waves getting back to the antenna, to the radar, can be perceived, and through machine learning algorithms, again, machine learning is used everywhere at Google, we can analyze both motion, but also a lot of different properties of the object that the radar is touching. So we decided a year ago to try to use this technology to see if we can improve the current limitations of textile recognition, yarn recognition, which is usually done through NRI, infrared, near-head infrared. And we've built last year a set of 300 fabrics, a bibliothèque of fabrics, where we train the radar to understand the fabric composition. And currently we've reached a very, very significant step into this research. It's going to be the first time that radar is used for fabric recognition, and we're close to 98% of recognition on viscose, cotton, and polyester. And we're going to tackle the blends very soon next year. So the overall goal of that research is to see how we can actually 10x, not improve 10% of the sustainability and circularity of fabrics, but really drastically change the way that today plants are recycling fabrics, and also identifying the fibers within that. Because the SOLI radar is a very cheap solution, it's very scalable, and it can very, very easily be implemented. And circling back to what I was saying at the very beginning, there are millions of innovations and millions of ideas from startups and big cloud companies and big tech companies today. I think what's very key is to make sure that we can nurture collaboration between fashion companies, between the industrial, between suppliers, and on all the stages, from traceability, sourcing of fabrics, and then after recycling, which is super key to me, as we know there are tons and tons of fabrics that are being thrown away and burnt on a monthly basis. The laws are going to change, especially in Europe. So we think that there is a huge opportunity to leverage better technology, scalable technology, in order to better identify. So it's really right now a very, very research program. It's a small team trying, where we didn't publish yet. We're going to publish our first research paper in January, and we're working with a lot of different players, from Refashion to IFM, with a sustainability chair that Kiring is also part of. So we're trying to build this ecosystem where we have people helping us to make this research move, to see if this can have an impact or not. And we don't know yet if it's going to be able to get into this industrialization phase, but so far we feel that there are solutions. And so if we can try to better understand how the fabrics are going to be recycled, then we can close the loop and make a better circular fashion, where anything from fast fashion to fashion at large could be used in a second, third, and fourth life. This is where we would like to get ideally, and we're not, of course, not going to make that alone. We're going to make that with partners.
This is just a personal question, because I cover this topic for the Financial Times for Sustainable Views, and I actually wrote a piece when the EU Commission put out their latest sustainable textiles report, and it was very interesting to see blockchain being referenced as one of the solutions. And when I interviewed some of the people responsible for it, one of the things I was trying to tease out of them was some sort of a timeline. Do you have any idea of when some of these solutions will be scalable to market?
So there are, I can't talk to blockchain. I think the very big difference between all the technologies from RFID blockchain is that both RFID and blockchain are being used at the very beginning of the process. They are being used within the design of the clothes themselves. And so you need to change the design. What we're trying to do with SOLI, the radar, is take do not change anything from the way the world works today, and just bring that little top of their I would say of the rocket, saying with the current system and the current world where again I think the number is close to 5.8 million tons of textiles that are discarded every year in the EU, without changing that, because we're not going to be able to redesign all the clothes from all the brands within the next 2 years. How can we just add this brick of technology on the very, very last, pass of the chain, and is there an impact there? Because again, and we've seen that at ATAP, and we see that every day. If you look into the innovation pastors quadrant, there is the blue sky research that might never end up anywhere because it's purely blue sky and amazing things could be created. But then when it comes to scaling and making sure that those innovations can find a market, it's a totally different world. And this is where we don't want to get trapped into inventing something which is never going to be used in real life, because it's too hard, because there are too many constraints, because it's too expensive. And there are dozens of, like gazillions of reasons you could not use a technology to solve those kind of issues. I'm still being optimistic. I'm just saying that there are so many constraints when it comes to leveraging advanced technologies and machine learning into solving circularity issues. But I'm sure both Andrew and Angel would say the same in their daily.
Thank you. I'm coming to them next, but it's really insightful to hear and encouraging to hear how it's going. So thank you. So Andrew, with regards to Cartier, in terms of experimenting with technology as far as AR and jewelry is concerned, could you walk us through the processes that you're working on, how it's developed and what your end goal is?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. One of the kind of unique conditions of our business, and it's across luxury, but in particular with hard luxury and jewelry and watches, there's oftentimes a really concrete separation between our clients and the product, meaning we can't produce enough of these precious goods to go into every boutique or every place where somebody might be encountering the items. And we're not the only business that's like this. That's true across a lot of different industries. And we've seen the emergence of AR as a way to influence people's purchase choices, and it's had a lot of success in industries like furniture, for example, with IKEA showing people what the pieces might look like in their room before they go to the effort of assembling them. Beauty is another one, seeing what makeup might look like on your face without the kind of unhygienic and difficult process of trying it on. So what could that be for jewelry? It was interesting for us because these purchases are emotional purchases. Most of the time, it's not so much about a practical question like, will it fit? Certainly there are fit questions, but in the end, the purchase is triggered by an emotional response to the piece. And when we started investigating this, the normal way to do it would be to go with a third-party provider who's developed a technology for AR. And there certainly are a lot of them for jewelry spaces of providers out there who wish to white label their solutions for jewelers like us. But we found that the solutions were all a bit lacking in that emotional value. And that's partly because a lot of them use the same technique for doing AR, which is to say that there's a 3D model of the piece and it gets mapped onto a video, and parts of it are occluded to make it look like it's sitting in the scene. That's kind of the standard way of doing AR for try-on. And because the lighting conditions don't match, the resolution is different. The 3D model looks kind of cartoony. Body tracking is fairly as advanced as it is now. It's still not convincing as an illusion. So to go beyond entertainment there, to really influence someone's purchase decision, we really felt that we needed to up the quality. And so we started working on this new way of doing augmented reality for jewelry using GANs, using a generative adversarial network. So, this, for people in the audience who might not be aware, it's the kind of same technique that's used for deepfake face replacement videos. Wow. And some other things. It generates new imagery based on training data of, in our case, video of people wearing the product. And as far as we know, it hasn't been used in augmented reality up to that point, partly because the big challenge there is the latency of the video processing. For about 2 years, we worked on this with our partners, Jolie Brain in Toulouse. not knowing if it was ever going to have the illusion of working in real time. You know, it was always several minutes of processing between the time a video was created versus the time imagery was synthesized. But late last year, that latency got down to under 15 milliseconds, which was the standard that we set for really creating an illusion of real time. And so it's worked. Honestly, it creates an illusion of jewelry that's in some cases indistinguishable from the physical item. And to see that being deployed in our boutiques now has resulted in some really incredible responses from our clients. There was, for example, one gentleman came in who had just gotten engaged to his fiance. He had up to that point not seen a wedding ring on his own hand, and when he saw the Cartier piece mapped onto his hand, he actually got a tear in his eye because it was the first time that he had seen that ring on his hand. So, you know, that level of response, I think, is very, very hard to get with something that doesn't really genuinely convince your brain that you're actually seeing the thing. And to me, that's really the power of AR. And so now we're working to industrialize the solution. We've rolled it out in a few boutiques in North America. More to come. I was actually just in San Francisco yesterday installing it in our San Francisco boutique. So for those of you in the audience who are in the Bay Area, please drop by Cartier and check it out. And so, you know, we're in the pilot. It'll be lasting for about 6 months, and we'll see what the real business impact is. But I'm quite optimistic.
Well, keep me posted, because this is definitely an interesting innovation. And so, and Gael, I'm curious, what technology is Kering currently using to implement and accelerate its, you know, gravitation towards circularity across the group?
Actually, we are using quite fine tools to monitor our supply chain in the eyewear, in the Kering eyewear brands, in the manufacturing, because it's a quite complex supply chain, because you cannot imagine how many different steps and pieces you have in a glasses frame. And so we did implement a blockchain referencement to make sure that we know exactly what has been done, when and where it has been done. So this is a first very interesting pilot we did implement. And after, it's more around the business, new business model. But Alexander McQueen has launched a pilot with the luxury re-commerce platform Vestiaire Collective that you all know. And so Alexander McQueen has invited his customer to sell their pre-loved items in return for store credit. So it's really, I was talking about new ways of consumption. It's true that it's coming stronger and stronger in that way, in secondhand. And we know that luxury especially is getting higher value when it's getting vintage. So this is why we need to repair, we need to really take care of this to get this high value, and we need to put in the hands of our final customer new tools, you know, to help them to promote this new business model. And as well, it's very important, I think, for the brand to show that they are really aware of what the customers are waiting for. And in this area, make sure that they can help to make in practice some circular business.
Thank you. So that you mentioned a couple of things that segue into my next question around repair culture, and, you know, maintaining or extending even the life cycle of the product. And at the same time, you know, all of the companies that are currently on this panel will be impacted by EU legislation around extended producer responsibility, EPR. So going back to an initial conversation that we were having around, you know, tech as a catalyst, looking at, for example, digital IDs and things like blockchain, how, in terms of transparency, can this innovation support this kind of need for greater ability to trace across the supply chain and the extended life cycle, post-sale and resale? And that's the question I'm throwing out to the panel. So I'll start with Gael, and Gael, because we've spoken about this very briefly with the model that you've introduced with Vestiaire Collective.
I was not supposed to answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry for that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's a general question. So I'll go back to Camille then, if you don't mind, Camille. How do you feel, whether it's digital IDs or, blockchain innovation, how is this helping to achieve greater transparency across the supply chain, but also for the extended, life cycle that's now a priority as a result of EU legislation?
Yes, well, for sure. I think transparency is absolutely key, and it's one of the main pillars of Google's culture. One of the recent programs that Google Cloud has been launching, the pilot was done with Stella McCartney back in, I think, 2019. It's been a while. Was to support Stella into understanding the traceability and the sourcing of their material. But I'm not even speaking about the first sourcing and first suppliers, but really trying to go super deep into the supply chain, trying to make sure that anything that they would buy would get an understanding, and back to even the cotton, where does it come from, what kind of chemicals were applied, and then after how did it travel. So I think for transparency, if you want to be transparent, you have to enable tracking in a good way, better understanding where the sourcing material comes from, and tools are very, very, very key in order to make good decisions. So as the computing power moves forward and as machine learning algorithms get easier and easier to use for broad companies, and also less expensive and more adapted to different kind of businesses, I think enabling both Google clients and Google partners, but also final users, to be empowered with this technology for better traceability at every level is really one of the main pillars of Google. And this is why a lot of technologies and a lot of research that Google does is actually open sourced. We have a lot of APIs, we have a lot of different things which are very easy to use and accessible for free. So I think this is our take, I would say, in making sure that transparency can be piloted and executed on top of just a vision of the mind saying that we wish we were transparent, but like actually do it.
Thank you very much. So that moves into our next topic, which is around comms, communications, which obviously as a journalist and a strategist working in the space to help brands kind of better communicate their values. I'm curious, I'll go back to Angel on this one. In terms of, consumer patterns and consumer expectations across luxury, what do you see as the current sort of consumer expectations of brands when it comes to sustainability and circularity in practice?
First of all, I think that most of our customers are waiting a lot for strong commitments from the fashion and luxury, of course, and they're expecting from us total transparency on how do we source, where do we produce, where the material comes from. Make sure that we are following strong social commitments as well, because depending on the market, it's true that the reflections and the concrete topics the customers are waiting for are slightly different. So we talk here about quality, here about social, here about cruelty-free. So we need on a broader scale to make sure to answer and to be ready to answer to concrete questions, because we know now that the sales associates are sometimes a little bit surprised by the questions that could arise. So it's our role to bring enough awareness and information to directed to the shops to help people to be able to answer. But yes, traceability, cruelty-free, and even 100% vegan material and garments, as well as accessories, of course. Those are the main topics that the customers are waiting for, and this is our role to make sure that we are transparent enough and bold enough to be able to answer them.
I love it. I mean, there's a buzzword this year at the Future Fabric Expo where they were talking about the material revolution, and of course I know Kering's been at the cutting edge of that, but it's lovely to actually hear that's now coming from the shop floor from customers and what they're asking for. Yeah. So my next question, Andrew, this is for you. And again, you're dealing with heritage brands at the same time juxtaposed to rapid innovation. How are you aggregating your consumers? Are you aggregating your consumers in terms of their responses to things like VR? Is it to do with the price point, or is it a free fall that anyone can try and access?
Well, part of what we're learning now is, are there going to be greater successes in some categories than others? We don't want to make an assumption on that and tell people what will be important. We want to listen to them and view based on their actual behavior. Our clients just in general are responding incredibly well to augmented and virtual reality. We've actually implemented a few VR experiences at our high jewelry events, which have offered people, the kinds of things that they can't do in regular life. In one case, it's to actually dive inside precious stones and look at the inclusions in the interior, which people have found very both entertaining and educational. I think we often get the question of, is Cartier going to produce digital goods in some way using Web3 technologies? And who knows what the future will hold there. I will say that we are a house that for the last 175 years has really established an identity based on physical materials and how things feel on your skin, and how things sort of enhance the body. And so it's a bit hard to understand exactly how that will translate into feelings of preciousness with Web3 technologies. But I think you're already seeing a lot of potential here. To go back to one of your earlier questions about circularity in products, one thing that we started doing in the 1990s was to have a program called Cartier Tradition, where we buy back historic Cartier high jewelry pieces at auction and we recondition them and sell them again in our boutiques. And so that's something we already have a process around. Those pieces tend to be quite rare because one of the issues here is authentication. Counterfeits are an incredibly huge problem in our world. And so what sometimes can prevent us from doing programs like that more at scale is the need for authentication of each individual item, which in some cases is easy if we have records on hand, but in some cases is much harder because we've made so many different products over so many different decades, which were then cataloged in so many different technologies, which may be obsolete by now. And so something like blockchain could be a more universal way of providing authentication, which might allow those kinds of programs to exist at a greater scale than the kind of individual archives-based authentication that we must do now for the Tradition program. So I'm quite excited about the potential of those. And I think we really just scratched the surface about this idea of what a house like Cartier, what their role might be in kind of enhancing feelings of preciousness in these digital spaces.
Thank you. And that is definitely a topical question beyond this conversation, is how heritage brands are integrating and adapting and bringing their clients along on this journey. Which brings me to my next question for Camille. So I've been covering this space of sustainability and luxury and fashion for quite a few years now. And I think one of my biggest curiosities is how, when you're bringing an innovative thing like Google Loop to market, how are you approaching communications as a way of kind of bringing your B2B partners along? Because obviously there will be skeptics, and I'm curious, how do you communicate with them? How do you win them over?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So currently, it's again, as I was mentioning, it's really very early stage research program. We might, and just to go back on how hard it is, if you want to understand and to build databases, accurate databases of all the blended fabrics that are being used today worldwide, it could take years. So it's really a matter of, for us, and we're again a small team and we're working on many different programs. It's really a matter for us of finding this new research and publishing very soon, so we can make sure that people out there, PhDs, people at school, people that are involved in the space, people that want to have change, can benefit from the study and can actually see, okay, the radar signal can have an impact on material recognition, and the impact goes through dielectric permittivity. We're actually looking for PhDs in dielectric permittivity for textile, and there must be like 10 worldwide. So it's mostly for us a matter of being super open to collaboration, and back to what Angel was mentioning at the very beginning, making sure that the right people are at the table and designing something that is going to work for them, because Google is not going to take care of their the circularity of fashion. It's not our job. Our job is to invent technologies and to make this technology potentially freely accessible and to display our research, so people in these very specific fields can create new businesses, can build on top of what we've been building, can create the hardware, can adapt NRI algorithms and whatever it needs to make sure that it can help this very specific industry. So I think back to communication, our role is find something that can work, that can be used, and make sure that we work with the right people in these fields to help us trigger our knowledge within the fashion industry, our fabric knowledge, our sourcing knowledge, and getting the information accessible to them for their use. This is really what we want to do with back, to the openness and transparency of making sure the know-how is accessible worldwide. This goes back to the very mission of Google. But I think for and not necessarily on Loop, but from Google perspective, tracking and communicating sustainability improvements for a company as big as Google goes again back to this transparency matter. And I think it's really related on three main pillars: establishing commitments and making sure that the commitments are the right ones, making reports, data-driven reports, and tracking progress. And this is, I think, if any company sets those three goals within a sustainability strategy to the next 5 to 10 years, there are very high chances that you see success in there.
Thank you very much. How can we avoid the traps of greenwashing?
We see a lot of brands that are coming to us really concerned about it. And it is a huge challenge. I mean, marketing needs to be catchy and attention grabbing, but sustainability is very, very nuanced. So we can't just fit things into like one simple sentence. So brands have been using certifications and easy stamps to provide that third-party validation. But we found that for circularity, there aren't so many options on the market when it comes to certifications. So we actually created circular design criteria that designers can use as almost like a checklist to back up their circularity statements. So we plan to eventually provide checks on this as well, so that companies can communicate their circularity statements in their marketing with a little bit more confidence.
Yes, good question. So first of all, of course, we all know the basics. Don't use any vague or broad terminology. Don't overstate, exaggerate. Don't make any claims that cannot be verified. Be open and transparent. So if you mislead, of course, above all, there is, of course, no real progress and impact. That itself is extremely harmful. But it is also very damaging to your brand reputation. And increasingly, what we have seen, especially in the last few weeks and months, there are legal risks associated with greenwashing. So several jurisdictions and regulators, such as consumer authorities, have really begun to define how to regulate unsubstantiated environmental claims. So let's take the European Green Deal, for example, and the revision of the EU consumer law to better inform and to protect consumers. Or there is also the Green Claim Codes published by the UK Competition and Market Authority. So my advice, stay informed and follow the regulatory guidance of your markets. This is something that is not going to go away, but the recent warnings and even lawsuits are certainly a wake-up call to take this very seriously. And that's a good thing. That's very positive, and I'm sure we all appreciate.
The next few questions that I have are for you all. So please start to think about your stances on what's coming. But, there are lots of kinds of consumer citizen-led activism now that's happening in the fashion and luxury space. And one of the big kind of buzzwords of this year has been this idea around degrowth. This constant chasing of profit, this constant chasing of depletion of nature's resources is making people think, even on a local scale, how do we redefine our economic systems? And to that effect, and it's for all of you, this question, what do corporations and or people need to be ready to sacrifice in order to reach more sustainable models to embrace innovation at the retail level? So I'll start with Andrew, actually.
Sure. I maybe have two answers to that question. Maybe the first one would be expectations of instantaneousness. which this is going to be really hard for us in the luxury space, because the norms of the luxury world are to want to give your client the thing that they want at the time that they want it. But there are really significant environmental implications of doing that sometimes. In particular, in the world of unique pieces like high jewelry, if a client in New York wants to see a piece that's located in Paris, it needs to fly to go see that person. And so that's a really significant cultural norm that would need to change. I had another answer to that question. No, I forget. I lost my chain of thought.
We can come back. I'll keep circulating the virtual.
Sounds good.
And Gael, this question's also for you. So what do you feel that we need to sacrifice, whether it's the corporation or the consumer, in order to reach a more sustainable model to embrace this determination?
Actually, I don't see it as a sacrifice, but it's just to get rid of the business as usual, as we were doing previously with TechMake and it's maybe implementing more sustainable practices from the field to the end of life of the products, and for what we can bring once again as commitment to our customers. So it's not for me. It's not something. It's something we need to do differently in a more sustainable manner, closer to the nature, closer to sustainability, to biodiversity, closer to the people as well. And yes, ensure that we can bring the same desirability to our end customers with quality, with of course compliant goods, and yes, with an heritage of the brands which is respected, but on a maybe a new modern manner.
Mm-hmm. And this, thank you. This also, Camille, Google's in a brilliant position really in terms of behavioral, cultural changes and influence. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, taking in account what you said, and Gael, that it might not be a sacrifice, but it's definitely a culture change. So what do you feel, Camille, that corporations and consumers need to be ready to shift in order to embrace this retail?
I think it's a very smart question, and it's I don't think it's a matter of sacrifice, but a matter of smarter choices. And for example, Google Maps in September rolled out this whole new route option, where instead of having the fastest route to go to Paris to Madrid, you would have the less carbon emitting route. So you have choice. It's a matter of just be informed in order to take the right choice. And this is, this goes back to, okay, if we can give people the information for them to understand what is their impact, even if it's at, one user scale, but then Maps has, of course, more than one users, but then you give them more informed choice. And by doing more informed choice, you can then decide, okay, what do I want to change in my current consumption? And this is very true. And, I think this rollout from Google Maps is just super smart. Going from point A to point B, sometimes, you don't want just to go the fastest way, but maybe the more sustainable way is a good option. And I would think also that Google has a very, very strong culture for also making sure that people that want to have an impact within the company can have one. Twice a year, we have something which is called the Climate Fair. And within the Climate Fair, there are groups of people that can pitch a program, an idea, a research, whatever they're working on that has an impact on climate change at large, and ask for 20 percenters, so person that would dedicate one day a week to join that program. So it's a job fair, internal job fair, where we're saying, guys, we have this program and we think that this could have this impact. And we're looking for software engineers, machine learning researchers, program managers, hardware technical people that could join on a 20% and even rotation, leave their job for 6 months and be part of this program because they think that they have an impact. And so back to, again, I think the same values as we did at the very beginning, transparency, giving people options and choice based on the data-driven decision enabled by data and transparency, and also a very, very strong culture of change and enabling people to change the world, not just, putting that on a report.
Thank you. That's quite profound. How can technology help achieve transparency in terms of tracing supply chain and product and materials life cycle?
We believe that technology can make data more accessible to all these stakeholders, as I mentioned previously. Now we only have space on a garment, on the care labels or on the sales tag to put information such as certifications or anything that you want to communicate to a customer. And for example, with technology such as QR codes, we can use that same amount of space and actually provide extra information, such as where the garment was produced. You can put a photo of the actual factory, photos of who made my clothes, which is really trendy right now. And as I mentioned earlier, the material composition, certifications, and this take back information. So really communicating to the client, like, what can they do with this at the end of its usable life or when they're done, really creating that reverse logistics system and keeping track of it all throughout the life cycle.
What have been some of the most successful strategies, mediums, partnerships, or approaches when it comes to communicating your company's initiatives when it comes to retail innovation?
I think something that really sets us apart is our holistic approach. So we really love to, work with brands all along this kind of like life of the garment. So we're not just taking one, small niche individual problem and solving it. We're looking at the industry as a whole and looking at the interconnections and what's the information missing. And very commonly, a company that starts with our circular ID might, go back upstream and work on circular design, or vice versa. So maybe they start with, the design and then going into circular ID and intelligent sorting.
And so my last question, and this is also for me personally, the $1 million question, because as I said, I cover in particular ESG as well for the Financial Times. So that's environmental, social, and governance to benefit the audience. And the biggest challenge, not just in fashion, not just in luxury, but across architecture, the built environment, banking, how do we measure the success or not, lack of success in sustainable practices, particularly if we're speaking about retail innovation? Is there, amongst your respective practices, do you feel that there is some progress being made in accessible tools to measure?
So yes, how to measure success? That's a good question. We, at our Accelerating Circularity project, we were having these discussions with our steering committee many times, how to even define success. Everything we do now, setting up a circular system for textile to textile recycling, everything we do is a learning curve. And by really defining what works and what doesn't work, that is part of our work. And that is very important for everybody.
Yes, so I think a lot of things are actually quite easy to track: water consumption, carbon emission, are you carbon neutral, carbon negative, how much do you so those are very basic reports. Then the scale of it can tend to become harder as you grow as a company. But I also think that again, Google is very data driven, and our newest campus in Bayview area in Mountain View has the kind of like best water system that can actually have 120%, it gives up 120% of water consumption. So we're actually producing more water than what we use on a daily basis. So we can use that loop. So I think there are many ways to do so, from a very quantifiable thing where you want to track some items, where you can actually also keying with ePNL that was launched by François-Henri Pinault is also very smart way to do so. And I would say each company should define KPIs which are very close to their business KPIs, and not to have two separate reports where this is our sustainability actions, this is our true P&L, and things need to be connected in order for them to actually have an impact and be sustainable in a business management way.
Thank you. You mentioned very briefly Kering's, for those, again, who don't know the acronym, Environmental Profit and Loss Reports. The same question I'm directing to Anne-Gaëlle. I actually interviewed Marie-Claire Deveau back in 2019 for the FT about the fact that Kering are probably one of the first to deliver not just measurements, but measurements that were open sourced, so that other people could start to. And I think this is what I'm getting at, is where is the progress going in creating an accessible, standardized way, a language even, of being able to measure this progress. So Angel, have you got any updates for us?
Updates. So no, okay, we have DPNL we'll talk about later on, but I think that the most important to see is the desirability of the brand as well, because if you're disconnected to your market and to what your end customer is waiting for, you're not matching anymore. And then, so with strong commitments, once again, you match to what the society and what the end customers are waiting for. So coming back to the DPNL, yes, of course, this has been implemented to measure and quantify in our impacts. So we are measuring carbon emission, water consumption, land use, waste, and they are converted into monetary values. And so it has been taking time to implement it, but now it's set up across all the brands, and all the brands in Kering's portfolio are using it. And it's really a very, very helpful tool, which on yearly or maybe in the future season to season, you can, as a designer, as a company, measure your environmental impact, and then take the smartest decisions in order to improve in a short term, let's say, your impacts. And it is very interesting to see that once again, the majority of our impacts on a garment, for instance, it's a two-thirds, excuse me, on the raw material choice. So thanks to the DPNL, we see that the majority of the impact is on the side of the raw materials, whether it's soil occupation, whether it's methane for the leather, whether it's water consumption, etc. So we see that we can improve our results through smart choice or through next-gen material, which will lift a little bit and as much as possible in a short way, we hope, which will lift the pressure we put on nature, because this is where everything is coming from, at least for our market. And it's really concrete. The impact is really concrete in that way. And this is definitely where we need to improve.
Thank you. And it gives a nice transition into jewelry, because obviously with fashion and textiles, the connection to nature and agriculture and the soil is very visible. But Andrew, I'm curious, how is the jewelry and the luxury sector within that sector, industry, I should say, how are they responding to trying to create a kind of standardized way of measuring and communicating, you know?
Yeah, well, one great thing about our industry is that people tend not to throw away our items. They pass them on to new generations, or resell them. And so that's wonderful. But you're right, there's an ever-shifting kind of concern about things like stone sourcing, which has been a concern for decades. What we need to do is, be a responsible player, and we have been for many decades. In the introduction of the Kimberley process for responsible diamond sourcing, for example, Cartier was one of the key founders there. But we need to also explain what we're doing to our clientele. For people who come into our boutiques and might ask about lab-grown diamonds, for example, there's subject to kind of messaging out there that implies that lab-grown diamonds are inherently more responsible or more sustainable or more culturally kind of good than mined diamonds. But that question is so fraught with assumptions.
That's a whole nother debate, because I know with the carbon and the energy and the water, it's exactly.
Not to mention that responsibly sourced mined diamonds are the basis of entire economies on other continents, and anyway, we need to provide people the materials to talk about those in ways that matches the expectation of culture. And generally people are good. They want to reward responsible choices with their purchase decisions, and we need to sometimes counteract greenwash type messaging in order to do that. But fundamentally, the great idea would be that the things that are done responsibly are the things that sell the best and are therefore the best for business in the end.
I'm
So
hoping that's
we do our best.
that's the future model. If we can all just do that, that would make my life so much easier. But I really love this discussion, and thank you all for answering these questions, you know, from the heart. And it's actually a pleasure and a privilege to be able to learn about, respectfully and individually, about what you're doing in terms of the solutions and the innovations that are coming through. So on that note, I pass the mic back to Enrique.
Thank you everyone for joining today's conversation, Mind the Planet with Circular Retail Innovation. We're so grateful to Yasmin and our speakers, and Gail, Camille, Andrew, Petra, and Claudia for all the insights and tackling some of these difficult questions. We'd also like to thank our media partner, Vogue Philippines, CFS Hub partner, Caring, our retail partner, Gallery Lafayette, and community partners, Amex and Meta. We look forward to keeping this discourse alive throughout the duration of CFS Summit 2022 and throughout the year with CFS programming. You can visit our newly launched page at cfs.fashion for more news, insights, and analysis on embracing circularity and technology for retail innovation.